The wheels of Emma's wheelchair carved deep tracks in the soft, damp dirt as her husband Daniel pushed her further and further into the forest. The evening shadows were stretching, becoming long, dark fingers that reached through the trees, and Emma's growing sense of unease deepened with every single yard they traveled. She tried to keep her voice even, but a tremor of fear was creeping in. "Where exactly are we going, Daniel?" she asked, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. His reply was a shard of ice in the cooling air, completely cold and detached. "Before we continue, it would honestly make my day if you'd hit that subscribe button. Also, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from, so please drop a comment below. Somewhere you won't be a burden anymore." From the deep, silent shadows between the ancient trees, unseen eyes watched them, and the events that were about to unfold would change absolutely everything. Emma Richardson had once been the very picture of success. At 32, she was the owner and creative force behind her own thriving interior design firm in Boston. She had married her college sweetheart, Daniel, and they lived in a beautifully renovated Victorian home in a leafy suburb. Their life, as curated on social media, was Instagram perfect, a polished image of happiness and achievement that was the envy of their friends and family alike. Their love story had begun 12 years earlier on the bustling campus of Northeastern University. Emma was a passionate design student, while Daniel was methodically pursuing his business degree. Their meeting was a classic movie moment, a collision in a crowded campus coffee shop, where Emma's latte ended up all over Daniel's expensive economics textbook. What began as a flurry of embarrassed apologies quickly blossomed into a 4-hour conversation that felt like it lasted only minutes. By the end of that week, they were inseparable, a single unit navigating the final years of their education together. But there was another significant person in Emma's college life, a figure who stood in stark contrast to Daniel: Adrian Foster, her former boyfriend. Adrian had been different from Daniel in every conceivable way. He was intense and principled, possessing a quiet, profound strength that seemed to come from a difficult childhood he rarely spoke of. He was at Northeastern on a full military scholarship, with a clear and unwavering plan to join the Special Forces after graduation. Adrian and Emma had shared a deep, almost telepathic connection, but ultimately, their visions for the future diverged. He was wholly committed to a life of military service, a life that would almost certainly involve deploying to dangerous, far-flung locations. Emma, on the other hand, craved stability. She dreamed of building her design business in one place, of putting down roots. Breaking up with him was one of the most painful decisions she had ever had to make, until the accident. The event that had cleaved her life into a before and an after, happened 3 years into her marriage with Daniel. She was driving home from a late-night client meeting during a violent thunderstorm. Rain was lashing down, turning the roads into black mirrors. Suddenly, a pair of headlights swerved directly into her lane. The resulting crash was catastrophic. It left her with a severed spinal cord and permanent paralysis from the waist down. The medical bills began to pile up with terrifying speed, a mountain of debt that even their good insurance couldn't conquer. Emma's design business, once her pride and joy, faltered as she spent months in grueling rehabilitation, learning to navigate a world that was suddenly full of obstacles from the confines of a wheelchair. In the beginning, Daniel played the part of the devoted husband perfectly. He was a pillar of strength, telling everyone who would listen how incredibly brave his wife was, how they, as a team, would get through this together. But behind the closed doors of their beautiful Victorian home, a different, uglier reality was taking shape. It started with small things, the size of frustration when he had to help me transfer from the wheelchair to the bed, the offhand complaints about how my mounting medical expenses were affecting our lifestyle, forcing them to cut back. Then came the comments about how our house, a place she had lovingly designed, just wasn't built for this kind of situation. About 6 months after the accident, Daniel convinced Emma to sign over temporary control of her business to him. "Just while you focus on your recovery," he'd said, his voice laced with false sincerity. Soon after the papers were signed, he hired a young, beautiful assistant named Vanessa Miller. She was able-bodied, vibrant, and became an increasingly constant presence in their home. Emma wasn't stupid. She saw the lingering looks they shared over the dinner table, the private jokes they whispered when they thought she wasn't listening. She could feel herself transforming from a wife into an inconvenience, a problem to be managed in her own marriage. As Daniel tightened his grip on Emma's business and their finances, he simultaneously withdrew from their life together. Date nights became a distant memory. Intimacy vanished completely. He started staying later and later at the office, his excuses becoming flimsier with each passing week. Emma's friends, many of whom were clearly awkward and uncomfortable around her new reality, gradually stopped visiting. Her world shrank until it was contained within the four walls of their house, a house that felt less like a home with each lonely day that passed. Through all of this emotional erosion, Emma never suspected just how far Daniel would go to remove her from his life. She clung to the naive belief that somewhere, buried deep beneath all the resentment and frustration, some small remnant of the love they once shared remained. It was a belief that would be utterly shattered on a cool autumn evening, 14 months after her accident. The day had begun just like any other. Daniel left for work early, with a perfunctory kiss on her forehead. Emma wheeled herself around their increasingly silent house, trying to find the motivation to work on a small freelance design project she had managed to secure without Daniel's knowledge. A small act of rebellion, a way of holding on to a piece of her old self. Then, a text from Daniel in the late afternoon came as a complete surprise. It read, "I'm taking you somewhere special tonight. Be ready at 7 o'clock. Dress warmly." After months of being treated like a piece of furniture, this unexpected gesture kindled a tiny, fragile flicker of hope in Emma's heart. Maybe he was finally coming to terms with their new reality. Maybe, just maybe, he wanted to reconnect. When Daniel returned home, he was buzzing with an odd, manic energy. He helped Emma into a warm sweater and jacket with a practiced efficiency that felt more clinical than caring. As he was loading her wheelchair into the back of their SUV, Emma noticed a suitcase tucked away in the corner. "Are we going somewhere overnight?" she asked, a hint of excitement in her voice. "Just be patient," Daniel replied, a wide smile stretched across his face that didn't come close to reaching his eyes. "It's a surprise." As they drove out of the city, leaving the familiar lights of Boston behind them, Emma's initial excitement slowly curdled into confusion, and then into a gnawing unease. When Daniel turned off the main highway and onto a narrow, unpaved Forest Service road, alarm bells began to shriek in her mind. "Daniel, where are we going? There's nothing out here but trees." His knuckles turned white as he gripped the steering wheel. "Can't you just trust me for once? Without all the questions?" The sheer harshness in his voice silenced her. They continued in a tense, suffocating quiet, driving deeper and deeper into the vast Massachusetts woodland as darkness fell around them like a shroud. What Emma couldn't possibly know was that they were being followed. A black pickup truck, its headlights dimmed, maintained a discreet distance behind them. The driver's face was lost in shadow, but his eyes never wavered from the taillights of Daniel's SUV. This mysterious follower was Adrian Foster, Emma's college boyfriend. He was now a decorated veteran, recently returned to civilian life after 3 grueling tours of duty overseas. Adrian had been trying to reconnect with old friends, Emma included, only to discover through a trail of vague social media comments that she had been in a serious accident. He was troubled by the strange absence of any recent photos or updates from Emma herself. A deep, instinctual concern had led him to drive by her house that evening, just in time to see her being helped into Daniel's SUV. She looked confused, vulnerable, and scared. Something about Daniel's body language, the furtive, impatient way he'd loaded her wheelchair into the car, had triggered Adrian's finely tuned instincts, honed by years of assessing threats. Without a clear plan, he had made a split-second decision to follow them, maintaining a careful, professional distance as the roads became increasingly remote. Back in the SUV, Emma's heart was hammering against her ribs as Daniel finally pulled to a stop in a small, isolated clearing. The powerful headlights illuminated nothing but a dense, impenetrable wall of trees stretching in every direction. "Daniel, you're scaring me. What are we doing here?" He turned off the engine, plunging them into an even deeper darkness. He sat in silence for a long, agonizing moment before finally turning to her. "You know, Emma, I've tried. I really have. But this isn't the life I signed up for." An icy wave of fear washed over her as he continued, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "The business is struggling because of your medical bills. We're drowning in debt. I can't keep living like this." "What are you saying?" Emma whispered, though deep down, a horrifying certainty was beginning to dawn. Daniel got out of the car, walked around to her side, and opened the door. The night air was bitingly cold against her face as he roughly pulled her wheelchair from the back and unfolded it with a sharp, metallic snap. "I'm saying goodbye, Emma." With that same chilling clinical efficiency, he transferred her from the car seat to the wheelchair, casually setting her purse in her lap. Emma's hands trembled uncontrollably as she realized the full, monstrous horror of what was happening. "You can't just leave me here," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I'll die out here alone." Daniel's face hardened into a mask of cruel indifference. "You have your phone. Maybe someone will find you, or maybe they won't. Either way, it's not my problem anymore." He reached back into the car and pulled out a small duffel bag, dropping it on the ground beside her wheelchair. "There's some water, a blanket, and a flashlight. That's more than you deserve after everything you've put me through." Emma's voice broke completely as hot tears streamed down her face. "Daniel, please. We can work through this. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. I love you." For a fleeting moment, something flickered in his eyes. A ghost of regret, perhaps, or a sliver of doubt. But then his phone buzzed with an incoming text message. He glanced at the screen, and his expression hardened once more into cold resolve. "Vanessa is waiting for me," he said. "We're starting over, Emma, without you." As the full, crushing reality of her situation crashed down upon her, Emma's pleas turned into desperate screams, but they fell on deaf ears. Daniel got back into the SUV, backed up without a second glance, and drove away, leaving her utterly alone in the clearing. The red glow of his taillights disappeared through the trees, a final fading symbol of his betrayal. Or so he thought. From his hidden position, Adrian watched in stunned, furious disbelief as the scene unfolded. His years of military training had prepared him for the horrors of war. But nothing could have prepared him for the sheer, calculated cruelty of witnessing the woman he once loved being abandoned in a remote forest simply because of her disability. As Daniel's SUV disappeared down the dirt road, Adrian sat frozen, his mind struggling to process what he had just seen. Then, hearing Emma's heartbreaking sobs echoing through the silent trees, he made his decision. He would not let her die here, not tonight, not ever. Emma Richardson sat alone in her wheelchair, the forest around her a wall of pitch black beyond the feeble, trembling circle of light from her phone's flashlight. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the device as she tried to call 911, only to see the mocking words, "No service," displayed on the screen. "This can't be happening," she whispered to herself, her breath forming a small white cloud in the cold air. He wouldn't really leave me here to die." But the vast, empty forest gave no answer, and the cruel, undeniable truth settled into the marrow of her bones. Her husband, the man she had loved for 12 years, had indeed abandoned her, choosing to start a new, unencumbered life with his assistant rather than honor his vows to stay by her side in sickness and in health. A surge of desperate energy propelled her as she attempted to wheel herself toward where she thought the road might be. But the forest floor was a treacherous landscape of uneven ground, covered with a thick carpet of fallen leaves and hidden branches. The wheelchair's front wheel caught hard on a thick root, nearly tipping her over into the dirt. Emma let out a frustrated guttural cry that seemed to be swallowed by the immense silence of the trees. "Is anyone there?" she called out, her voice thin and reedy, knowing how utterly unlikely it was that anyone would hear her. "Please help me." The forest seemed to absorb her words, returning nothing but the distant, mournful hoot of an owl and the soft rustle of leaves in the night breeze. Time became a meaningless concept as her panic grew into a living thing, cold and heavy in her chest. The temperature was dropping steadily, and in her hurried departure, Daniel hadn't given her a chance to grab her essential medication. By morning, the chronic pain that was her constant companion would become an unbearable agony, just as a wave of utter hopelessness threatened to overwhelm her. Emma heard a twig snap somewhere in the darkness beyond her light's reach. Her head jerked up, her senses instantly on high alert. "Hello? Is someone there?" Silence. Then the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching through the underbrush. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. Was it Daniel? Had he come back, his conscience finally getting the better of him? Or was it something else entirely? A stranger, an animal, someone or something that posed an even greater danger? "Who's there?" Her voice trembled as she aimed her phone's weak flashlight beam toward the sound. The light caught a tall figure emerging from between the trees. It was a man, broad-shouldered and solid, his face partly shadowed by the hood of his jacket. Emma's breath caught in her throat as a war of fear and desperate relief battled within her. The figure stepped closer, moving into the full circle of light. The hood fell back to reveal a face that sent a powerful shock of recognition through Emma's entire body. "Adrian," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper, hardly believing her own eyes. Adrian Foster stood before her. He was older, of course, than when she'd last seen him. His face was more weathered, etched with lines of experience, and his eyes carried a weight they hadn't before. But it was unmistakably him, her college boyfriend, the man she'd once thought she might spend the rest of her life with, before their paths had so sharply diverged. Emma. His voice was deeper than she remembered, steady and impossibly calm despite the bizarre circumstances. "Are you hurt?" For a moment, she was utterly speechless, the sheer, staggering improbability of his presence rendering her mute. Then reality crashed back in, and the emotional dam inside her broke. Tears streamed down her face as the words tumbled out in a chaotic rush. "Daniel, he left me here. He's not coming back. He's with someone else now. He wanted me to die out here." Her voice broke on the last words, turning into a heart-wrenching sob. Adrian knelt beside her wheelchair, his expression grave but perfectly controlled. Up close, Emma could see the details of the man he had become. A thin, white scar that ran along his jawline that hadn't been there before, and eyes that had clearly seen things she couldn't begin to imagine. "I know," he said quietly. "I saw what happened." Emma's tears paused as confusion cut through her grief. "You saw? How?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "I was following your car. I had a bad feeling when I saw him loading you into the SUV earlier." He paused, seeming to choose his words with immense care. "I've been back in Boston for a few weeks. I wanted to look you up, see how you were doing. Then I heard about your accident and how isolated you'd become. Something just didn't feel right. You were watching our house? Under any other circumstances, the question would have been laced with alarm. But at this moment, Emma could only feel a profound, overwhelming gratitude that someone in the world had been concerned enough to check on her. Just drove by today. Call it a soldier's instinct. But the way he was acting, I couldn't just drive away. Adrian stood up and surveyed the dark, oppressive forest around them. We need to get you somewhere warm. My truck is parked about half a mile back. Emma gestured helplessly at her wheelchair and the uneven, root-strewn forest floor. I can't exactly hike out of here. Adrian nodded, his expression softening slightly. I know. I'm going to carry you. Before Emma could protest, Adrian had moved behind her wheelchair and was carefully placing a thick, woolen blanket from his backpack around her shoulders. I'm too heavy, Emma objected, her voice colored with a fresh wave of embarrassment. And what about my wheelchair? The chair will have to stay for now, he said calmly. I'll come back for it once you're safe. With a gentle, practiced efficiency, Adrian slipped one arm under her knees and the other securely behind her back. And you're not too heavy, he said, his voice firm. I've carried wounded men twice your size through terrain much worse than this. As he lifted her effortlessly from the wheelchair, Emma was struck again by the surreal, dreamlike nature of the situation. Her husband of 10 years had abandoned her to die, and now her college boyfriend, a man she hadn't seen in nearly a decade, was carrying her to safety through a dark, foreboding forest. How did you find me? How did you know where Daniel was taking me? She asked, her voice muffled against his jacket as he navigated carefully through the trees, his movements steady and sure despite the extra weight. I kept a safe distance behind your SUV. When he turned onto this Forest Service road, I knew something was seriously wrong. I parked my truck and followed on foot once you got deep enough in. He paused, adjusting his grip slightly to make her more comfortable. I was about to intervene when he drove off, but I wanted to make absolutely sure he was actually leaving you first. Emma's mind was a whirlwind of questions. Why are you even in Massachusetts? The last I heard, you were deployed overseas. Adriana's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. 3 tours of duty. I got out 6 months ago. Came back to the States. Did some private security work for a while, then decided to come back to Boston to settle some unfinished business. Something in his tone made Emma wonder just what kind of unfinished business would bring him back to this city after all these years. But she was too exhausted, too emotionally overwhelmed by the night's horrific events, to press him further. They continued in a comfortable silence for a time, the only sounds their synchronized breathing and Adrian's careful, crunching footsteps on the forest floor. Finally, they emerged onto a narrow dirt road where a black pickup truck was parked, its outline barely visible in the inky darkness. Almost there, Adrian said, his breath slightly labored now from the exertion. He managed to open the passenger door with one hand and gently placed Emma on the seat, making sure the blanket was still tucked securely around her. Thank you, Emma whispered, the full, terrifying impact of what might have happened without his intervention beginning to truly hit her. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there. Adrian's expression was unreadable in the shadows as he closed her door and walked around to the driver's side. Let's just get you somewhere safe, he said. Then we can figure out what to do next. As the truck's powerful engine rumbled to life and the headlights sliced through the darkness, illuminating the narrow forest road, Emma found herself wondering what next could possibly look like. Her husband had just tried to murder her through abandonment. She had no wheelchair, no life-sustaining medication, and was now in the company of an ex-boyfriend who had, by his own admission, been watching her house and following her car. Under any other circumstances, she would have been terrified. But as she glanced at Adrian's stoic, calm profile, illuminated intermittently by the dashboard lights, she felt something she hadn't experienced in many, many months. Completely and utterly safe. The truck bounced along the rough, rutted road, heading even deeper into the forest rather than back toward the city. "Where are we going?" Emma asked, a new wave of uncertainty washing over her as she realized she had no idea where Adrian was taking her. "I have a cabin about 20 minutes from here," he replied, his eyes fixed on the difficult road ahead. "It's isolated, but it has everything we need: heat, running water, first aid supplies." "You have a cabin in these woods?" Emma couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Adrian nodded. "I bought it when I got back from my last tour. I needed somewhere quiet, away from people." He paused for a moment, and then added softly, "Somewhere to heal." The word hung between them in the confined space of the truck, heavy with unspoken meaning. Emma studied his profile more carefully now, noting the persistent tension in his jaw, the careful, deliberate control in his movements that suggested he was a man accustomed to containing something powerful and volatile within himself. "Adrian, what happened to you after we broke up?" For a long moment he was silent, and Emma thought he might not answer. Then he spoke, his voice measured and even. "I did what I always planned to do. I joined the Special Forces. I saw action in places I'm still not allowed to talk about. I did things I wish every day I could forget." He took a deep, steadying breath. "Then, about a year ago, an operation went bad. We lost some good men. I got injured pretty badly myself." He briefly touched his side, a gesture so quick Emma almost missed it. "They patched me up, gave me some medals, and then they decided I'd done enough. An honorable discharge. They sent me home to figure out what happens next." His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Turns out, that's a lot harder than it sounds." Emma absorbed this information, hearing both the words he said and the vast, empty spaces of what remained unspoken. The idealistic, determined boy she had known in college had been forged into a man by the fires of combat and loss. Yet here he was, still stepping in to help someone in need, still putting himself at risk for others. "I'm sorry," she said softly, not sure if she was apologizing for asking or for the immense hardships he had clearly endured. Adriana's expression softened slightly. "Don't be. We all make our choices." He glanced at her briefly, his eyes meeting hers in the dim light. Like Daniel made his tonight. The mention of her husband's name brought the crushing reality of the situation back into sharp focus. Emma's hands began to shake as the sheer enormity of what had happened threatened to overwhelm her once again. "He tried to kill me," she whispered, the words sounding unreal and foreign even as she spoke them. "My husband brought me to the middle of nowhere and left me to die, all because I'm disabled, because I became an inconvenience." Adrian's voice was gentle but firm. "Yes, he did, and he needs to be held accountable for that." "How?" Emma asked, despair coloring her voice. "It's my word against his. He'll just say I asked to go for a drive, that we had an argument and I told him to leave me alone for a while. That when he came back, I was gone." She laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Who in the world would believe that a successful businessman would just abandon his disabled wife in the middle of the woods? "I would," Adrian said simply, his voice unwavering. "I saw it happen. And I imagine there's a lot more to the story. Things that happened before tonight that show a clear pattern of behavior." Emma was quiet, her mind reeling back through the months of subtle emotional abuse, the ever-increasing isolation, the gradual takeover of her finances and her business. "There is," she admitted, "but I'm not sure it's enough to prove anything." Adrian turned the truck onto an even narrower path. one that was barely visible among the dense trees. "Let's just focus on getting you safe and comfortable for tonight," he said. "Tomorrow we can start figuring out how to make him pay for what he's done." The word pay hung in the air, carrying a hard, sharp edge that made Emma glance at Adrian. There was something in his tone, a controlled, precise anger, that reminded her that this man had been professionally trained to eliminate threats. "Adrian," she said carefully, "whatever we do, it has to be legal. I don't want a revenge that puts either of us in jail." The truck slowed as they approached a small clearing. In the headlights, Emma could now make out a rustic cabin built of dark wood with a solid stone chimney. It looked sturdy and well-maintained, if deliberately and completely isolated from the rest of the world. Adrian put the truck in park and turned to face her fully for the first time since he'd rescued her. "I promise you, Emma," he said, his eyes boring into hers, "Daniel will face justice for what he's done. Legal justice." His eyes, however, held a steel-like determination that suggested he had very specific and perhaps very different ideas about what that justice might entail. As Adrian carried her into the warm, welcoming cabin and settled her on a comfortable couch near a crackling wood stove, Emma was struck by the strange, impossible twist her life had taken in just a few short hours. This morning, she had been a trapped, diminished version of herself, a prisoner in a loveless marriage. Now she was in a forest cabin with a man from her past, a man who had seen her at her absolute most vulnerable and had stepped in without a moment's hesitation, a man who, she was beginning to suspect, had never fully let her go. 6 months later, Emma sat in the packed courtroom, her wheelchair positioned at the very end of the front row. Adrian was a steady, reassuring presence beside her. The journey to this single moment had been arduous and exhausting. There had been endless depositions, hearings, motions, and counter-motions, as Daniel's high-priced attorney, Carter Blackwell, employed every dirty tactic in the book to delay and derail the proceedings. But now, finally, the jury was returning with their verdict. The past 6 months had transformed Emma in ways both subtle and profound. The frightened, isolated woman who had been abandoned in the forest was gone. In her place was someone more resilient, more determined, and perhaps most importantly, someone who was surrounded by a network of unwavering support she had carefully rebuilt, piece by piece. Her therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Patel, had helped her to understand the insidious patterns of Daniel's abuse and her own complex responses to it. Rebecca had become not just her attorney, but a fierce friend and advocate. And Adrian had been her constant rock, never pushing, always supporting, his deep feelings for her evident in every gesture, but respectfully restrained as she worked through the immense trauma of her past. A hush fell over the courtroom as the jury filed back into the box, their faces unreadable. Emma's hand instinctively sought out Adrian's, and she drew strength from his quiet, unshakable confidence. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Watkins asked, his voice echoing in the silent room. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with kind, sympathetic eyes, stood up. "We have, Your Honor." Emma held her breath as the charges were read aloud, one by one. Attempted murder, financial fraud, domestic abuse, conspiracy to commit murder. On count after count, the single word guilty rang through the courtroom like a clear bell. Daniel, seated at the defense table, remained stone-faced, his shoulders rigid with defiant tension. Beside him, Carter Blackwell scribbled notes furiously, already planning the appeals process. When the final guilty verdict was announced, a soft, shaky exhale escaped Emma's lips. It was not a sound of triumph, but of profound relief. Relief that the truth had finally been heard and acknowledged. Relief that justice, imperfect though it might be, had been served. Judge Watkins scheduled the sentencing for the following month. and then addressed the courtroom. "I want to thank the jury for their diligent service in this very difficult case. Court is adjourned." As the room began to clear out, Emma remained seated, processing the overwhelming moment. Daniel was led away in handcuffs, and he paused for a brief, chilling moment to glance in her direction. Their eyes met across the crowded courtroom. No words were exchanged. None were needed. In his gaze, Emma saw not a shred of remorse, but only a cold, chilling calculation. Even now, he was measuring his chances of an eventual appeal. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca expertly fielded a barrage of questions from the press while Emma and Adrian slipped out a side entrance, avoiding the media frenzy. "How are you feeling?" Adrian asked gently as they drove away from the courthouse. "Honestly, I'm not sure," Emma replied, her voice quiet. "I thought I'd feel victorious, or vindicated, but mostly I just feel free, like I can finally stop looking over my shoulder and start looking forward instead." Adrian nodded, his expression full of understanding. "That makes perfect sense. This was never about winning for you. It was about reclaiming your life." "Exactly," Emma confirmed. "And speaking of reclaiming my life, I have something I want to show you." When they arrived at their destination, a small commercial building in a quiet, up-and-coming part of Boston, Emma asked Adrian to help her from the car, but she declined her wheelchair. "I want to do this on my own," she explained, accepting only his arm for balance as she carefully navigated the short distance to the building's entrance using her cane. The intensive physical therapy she'd committed to over the past months had yielded modest but deeply meaningful improvements in her mobility. While she still relied on her wheelchair for longer distances, she had gradually regained the ability to walk short stretches with support. "What is this place?" Adrian asked, a look of curiosity on his face as Emma unlocked the front door. "The future," she replied with a radiant smile, leading him inside. The interior was still a work in progress. The walls were freshly painted, the new furniture was still covered in protective plastic, and computers were waiting to be set up. But the sign above the reception desk was finished, and it was proudly displayed: Phoenix Accessibility Consulting. "It's my new business," Emma explained, her face alight with a purpose and passion that Adrian hadn't seen since their college days. "We provide consulting services to businesses trying to improve their accessibility, and not just physical accommodations, but inclusive hiring practices, adaptive technologies, the whole spectrum." Adrian looked around the bright, airy space, a slow smile of understanding spreading across his face. "You're turning your experience, everything you went through, into a way to help others." "That's the plan," Emma confirmed. "I've already hired 2 consultants, one with a visual impairment and another with a hearing loss. We start taking on clients next month." Pride filled Adrian's expression as he looked at her. "Emma, this is incredible. Truly. I couldn't have done it without you," she acknowledged, her voice soft. "Your support, your belief in me, especially when I couldn't believe in myself." "You did all the hard work," Adrian countered. "I just had the privilege of witnessing it." They toured the small office space, Emma explaining her vision with a growing, infectious animation. The business represented more than just a professional rebirth. It was her declaration of independence, her defiant refusal to be defined by what had been done to her. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you," Emma said as they finished the tour, her tone growing more serious. The cabin, Adrian's cabin in the forest, had become her sanctuary during the trial, a place removed from the prying eyes of the media and the painful memories of the home she had once shared with Daniel. But now, with the trial finally concluded, decisions needed to be made. "I've been thinking about looking for my own place," Emma continued, watching Adrian's face carefully. "Somewhere here in the city, closer to the new office." A brief flicker of disappointment crossed Adrian's features before he quickly composed himself. "Of course," he said, That makes perfect sense with your new business. But, Emma added, her voice softening, I've also been thinking about us, about what we've become to each other over these past 6 months. Adrian met her gaze, and for the first time, he allowed the full depth of his feelings for her to show in his eyes. Emma, I would never presume. I know, she interrupted gently. You've been incredibly respectful of my space and my healing process. But I'm ready now, Adrian. I'm ready to explore what we might be together, beyond crisis and courtrooms. The hope that bloomed in Adrian's eyes was a perfect match for the lightness that Emma felt in her own heart. The tentative, fragile joy of new beginnings, built on a solid foundation of mutual respect and genuine, hard-won care. I was thinking, she continued, a small smile playing on her lips, maybe we could find a place together, somewhere that isn't shadowed by either of our pasts. Not the forest, not my old house, somewhere brand new. Adrian's smile was radiant. I'd like that very much. Their moment was interrupted by Emma's phone ringing. It was Rebecca, with an update about the civil case against Vanessa, who had received a more lenient sentence in exchange for her testimony against Daniel, but still faced significant financial penalties. As Emma handled the call, Adrian moved to the large window overlooking the street, giving her privacy. Watching her, confident, engaged, directing her attorney with a clear, unwavering purpose, he marveled at the incredible transformation she had undergone. When she finished the call, Adrian offered his hand. Ready to go celebrate the verdict and your new venture? Emma accepted his hand, using it for balance as she rose carefully from her seat. Actually, she said, I think I'd like to stay here a while longer, just to sit in this space and absorb the reality of it all. Understanding perfectly, Adrian pulled 2 chairs together by the window. They sat side by side in a comfortable, companionable silence, watching the afternoon light shift and change across the room that represented Emma's future. You know, Emma said after a time, her voice reflective, when Daniel left me in that forest, he thought he was ending my story. But he was really just setting me free to write a new one. Adrian's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally, a perfect fit. And what does this new story look like? Emma's gaze swept across her newly launched business, then returned to meet Adrian's warm, steady eyes. It looks like purpose, she said. It looks like justice, not just for me, but hopefully for others through this work. And, she added softly, squeezing his hand, it looks like love, the real kind, the kind that's built on truth and respect. As the sun began to set outside, casting a warm, golden glow across the empty room, they remained together in that quiet moment of infinite possibility. 2 people who had found each other through unimaginable darkness, but were now stepping together into the bright, welcoming light of a future that neither of them could have possibly imagined just 6 short months before. In the distance, the courthouse stood as a stark reminder of justice served. Beyond it, the forest where Emma's long journey of reclamation had begun. And here, in this sunlit room, the promise of tomorrow stretched out before them. Not perfect, not without challenges, but authentically theirs to shape together.